It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change.
Acts of human-caused climate change are happening now.
Effects of climate change
by the climate crisis.
Line of climate change.
On climate change.
Climate change.
This is now a clear global problem.
It's kind of everywhere, isn't it? I'll be honest with you, I didn't even enjoy making that montage. It made me feel uneasy, helpless, and actually gave me a lot of anxiety listening to all of those clips. If that triggered something for you too, I apologise. But those emotions might not be totally unjustified. We do have a real problem on our hands. Fortunately, there are some great people working on incredible solutions. It's the big one, climate change. I've been holding off tackling the subject so far on the show because, well, we're still finding our feet and it's a mammoth topic. I didn't really know which angle was best to approach it from, but after a while I realised that we're never going to solve this problem with one person or one answer or one effort, and so it didn't really matter where I started, as long as I started. But that said, I can't think of a much better place to begin our conversation into climate change than with today's guests, Lizzie McNish and XinRan Liu from Undo. In essence, Undo capture carbon from the atmosphere and store it back in the ground, reversing the effects of excess carbon in our atmosphere. Just before we say hello to them both, here is this week's positive news story. The Colombian football team Atlético Nacional SA has recently teamed up with Efecto Ringo to promote an awareness of animal abuse and those that are in need of adoption. It was a beautiful moment as the players walked onto the pitch, each holding a dog. There actually isn't a huge amount more to this story, it's just something I saw that brought a smile to my face, and I'll drop a link to the video in the show notes. Now, let's see what the guys from Undo are doing to make sure we don't just plummet this planet into one big flaming disaster. Hello to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to get straight in because, as I understand it, you guys are very busy saving the world. So I think it's important I don't take up too much of your time. But let's just give everyone some context onto who you are. So Lizzie, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. I kind of figure you're at the start of your journey, being that you're doing an internship. Is that right? Just give us your background and how you ended up here with Undo.
Yeah, for sure. So I have, as you say, I'm a recent graduate. I've just graduated in chemistry a few months ago. And I started off at Undo in an internship role in the ops team. And now I've been hired full time. So my role at Undo is an operational associate within the ops team.
Operational associate. So what's your day-to-day look like? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's probably twofold what I do. One of the main things is data management. So I get all the data in from our contractors and, farmers overseas and collate it into our online Microsoft-based system and then make sure it's all correct and assign it over to our carbon team to generate carbon credits. That's kind of the main bulk of what I do. And the second thing, I guess, is just ensuring that we have a good professional relationship with all of our contractors.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And XinRan, the same to you. I guess head of science, Undo, I think science is something Undo take quite seriously. So that's quite an important role. So just, give us a bit of your backstory and how you ended up here with Undo.
Sure. I am currently the head of science research for Undo. Prior to that, I spent over a decade in particle physics, building large-scale detectors to look for neutrinos and dark matters in some of the deepest mines around the world. And these are usually multi-year projects. But at some point, my last experiment came to a natural conclusion, and I was making a decision point, and I thought, the climate, we have this ever-narrowing window to address the climate crisis, so I decided to make a switch. And while I was looking around, enhanced rock weathering seemed like the incredibly scalable, high permanent solution to carbon dioxide removal. So that seemed like a really great area for me to divert and devote my time. Hence, I applied to, at that time, joined the Future Forest company, which has now become Undo. So Future Forest company included planting trees, biochar, and enhanced rock weathering. But it was very quickly realized that enhanced rock weathering is by far the most scalable carbon dioxide removal approach of all of those. So we decided to separate, and the Future Forest company still remains, but we are now, Undo. So that's how I became head of science for Undo. And as such, I kind of oversee our entire scientific program, from development of our geochemistry modeling, which allows us to kind of predict what happens to the rock when it hits the ground over the next 20 to 30 to 50 years, as well as then deploying the field measurements to measure the signal in our field to match to those model predictions in order to accurately quantify how much carbon dioxide is being removed. And on top of that, we also have lots of agronomical trials to determine a lot of the co-benefits of enhanced rock weathering. So in a world where lots of technologies can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, one of the things that sets enhanced rock weathering apart is definitely the myriad of co-benefits that it provides.
I think I'm going to learn a lot from you both today. This is great. The level of expertise is far beyond mine, so I'm excited. Let's talk about the problem at hand. Okay, we're talking about climate change. We're talking about carbon emissions. How simple can you make this for me if we're to walk through the basics of excess carbon emissions in the atmosphere? Why is that a bad thing? Where are we heading if we don't do anything about it?
So we all know excess CO2 emissions leads to global warming. That's a fact. And putting it into context in terms of specific numbers, heading into an increase in global temperatures around 2 degrees, that leads to global crop failure. And above a 4 degrees increase, that's kind of complete climate catastrophe, if you want to put it in context. So, and then just a few more stats for you. Where we are now, the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, we've increased them by 50% in comparison to pre-industrial levels. So it's massive change that humans have made to this planet.
Undo claims that simply not putting more CO2 into the atmosphere, and I guess the word we use for that a lot is net zero, if we were to stop emitting, that in itself isn't actually going to be enough, right? We need to undo some of the damage we've already done. Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we do carbon removals. So net zero is fantastic, but net negative is even better. So essentially, you're removing legacy carbon emissions. That's the end, definitely.
And could you just walk us through exactly what Undo's process for that is? How I gather there's probably a few different ways in which you can capture carbon from the atmosphere. What is it about Undo's process that's so good, so unique, so effective, and something that you guys believe in?
Yeah, so I'm happy to elaborate on that more. So we're using a technology called enhanced rock weathering. So before any enhancements, rock weathering is the natural process that's been happening on our planet for millions, hundreds of millions of years. It's happening all around us today. And that process begins as rain falls through the atmosphere. CO2 in the atmosphere is dissolving into the rainwater to form very mild carbonic acids. Those carbonic acids, when they fall onto mineral-rich rocks like basalt, which is like Giant's Causeway, Calton Hill here in Edinburgh, it's breaking down those rocks to form bicarbonates. And those bicarbonates are then washed away by the rainwater into river systems, where it ultimately ends up in the ocean, where it sinks to the ocean floor as calcium carbonate or stays in the ocean bicarbonates, and it's locked away for geological time. So that's tens to hundreds of thousands of years. So that's the natural process. That's nature's natural carbon regulation system. We are just asking the question, how can we accelerate that process faster to drive down carbon dioxide at a faster rate? So that's the enhanced weathering part comes by essentially we are powderizing the rock to increase the reactive surface area, thereby something that takes a long time to weather can weather in 20, 50 years. So I think a good analogy for that, I always think, is like if you take a handful of coffee beans in the morning, you throw it in your cafetiere, you're not going to get a very potent coffee and you can be waiting for ages. But if you grind up your beans, you'll unlock those reactive surface areas. You get a really potent brew really quickly. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. And it's really, I always think this is a triple win technology because you are using, asphalt is one of the most readily available rocks globally. It's kind of everywhere. And there's a large aggregate industry that exists already kind of quarrying the material on the gigaton scale. And by taking that material crushed, you're using existing roads and infrastructures and land. There's no changes to any of those practices. You can spread the finely crushed basalt onto agriculture land. So existing roads, infrastructures, and no changes in land practice is a major bonus. And once the rock is down, it's releasing nutrients from the soil. There's added benefits to the farm, to the farmer. There's nutrient release for the crop. There's improvements to soil. So that's the second big win. And then, of course, the third big win is you're massively drawing down carbon dioxide at a large rate. So that's the big win for the planet.
I'm glad you put it in terms of coffee because that is language I understand.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely the most important crop. And there's been great trials where they use the enhanced rock weathering on coffee as well to boost yield. So so the two can be mutually beneficial for sure.
Oh, wow, that's brilliant. I had no idea. I bet that visualization really does help. And I think this is an important part of the conversation that we'll probably touch upon a little bit later, but how effectively you guys are able to communicate this stuff, I do think is really important because you are scientists, you're very, very smart people. Silly sausages like me, we might care about these things, but we don't necessarily always understand them as much as we should. I wonder if it's worth mentioning any other types of carbon capture that are any more or less effective. I mean, XinRan earlier used the word scalable. You're currently working on the most scalable solution. So perhaps are there other solutions that are technically very effective, but they're just not scalable, they cost too much money?
Yeah, absolutely. I think carbon dioxide removal technologies can be largely categorized right now into nature-based and also kind of industrial technology-based. Nature-based solutions are, for example, planting trees, and that you can very rapidly capture a lot of carbon dioxide in trees, but that is also there's a lot of jargons I used earlier. So yeah, so in terms of scalability, there isn't physically enough land to plant sufficient amount of trees to get to the kind of the 10 billion tons per year annual removal of CO2 that we need as requested by the IPCC. So as I think Lizzie touched on earlier, we are now currently emitting something like 40 billion tons of CO2 every year. And even with great effort, we can reduce that by 60, 80%, but there will be still some residual amount of CO2 left to remove, even just to get to net zero. And then you still need to get to net negative to undo a lot of the damage that's sort of done, as Lizzie already mentioned. So on that kind of scale, you need a huge amount of land and planting trees. And that's always hard to scale because not all land is also great for trees planting. There are being studies done in certain areas because soil is a great storer of carbon as well. And in certain conditions, there has been studies in the Southeast Asia where forests have been planted, CO2 had been locked away in the trees, but then CO2 also been released in the soil. And the net result was actually more emission of CO2 than the trees themselves sequestered. So it's not always the perfect solution. And also trees are vulnerable to forest fires, to other ways where it can be damaged and killed. And when they die, they decompose and they release a lot of the CO2 back. So you need to find different ways to preserve the tree CO2 locked away once they've died. So it's a very powerful one-shot solution, but there are some limiting factors to its scalability for sure. And also I learned not all communities want trees. For example, like the Yorkshire Moors is iconic in literature, and I think the locals might not really want that to change into forest often, right? Because there is heritage and memories in those kind of landscapes. But nonetheless, it's a very great technology. There's nature-based technologies like planting trees have great co-benefits to biodiversity and all these facts. So those are typically associated with nature-based solutions. Whereas the industrial technology-based solutions are, I think, most represented by a technology called direct air capture, which your listeners might have heard it before, where you're actively building plants to pump CO2 from the air into the ground and storing and locking it away. So this is a very high permanent solution as well. And you can directly measure the amount of CO2, but again, like requires the building of large plants, a lot of materials, a lot of CO2 emitted to construct these plants. And then each plant has a limited amount of CO2 it can pump underground annually, right? So you're going to have to deploy thousands of these plants globally. And the initial CO2 footprint of building one of these plants can take many, many years to offset. So I think the beauty of enhanced rock weathering is that it kind of sits in between these two technologies. It's nature-based, but we're accelerating it using technology. And it has the co-benefits to its environment like nature-based solutions do. But it's very scalable because we are already have the infrastructure there to quarry basalt at the gigaton scale. And we have the roads and machineries. All the farms have machineries to spread our material because they use it typically now to spread lime and fertilizers. So you can very rapidly get to that gigaton scale removal, which other technologies probably would take more time to mature to in some ways.
Sure. I think as well, just to give some context in terms of scalability, some numbers to how scalable this really is. So Undo in September spread the same volume as we did the whole of 2022. And that's a tenfold increase in spreading numbers. And if that trajectory hopefully continues, you can just see how scalable and how impactful ERW could be.
Wow. It's really impressive. I mean, yeah, from a technological standpoint, it's quite remarkable. And to be honest, I think trees is probably the only sort of example I could have thought of. Someone said to me, carbon capture, how do you do that? I probably would have said, yeah, plant more trees because that will please everyone. I didn't really consider that there'd be parts of the world where people wouldn't want more trees. And so I can blame the people of Yorkshire now. I had a fabulous trip there, but I can blame them for climate change.
No,
I
having
joke,
worked in Yorkshire for over a decade, I'm definitely not blaming people of Yorkshire for anything. And it was also definitely news to me as well. And it was only a conversation with a climate legal expert that I came to realize that not everybody wants these iconic landscapes that have been documented in famous literatures around the world to change by new forests, right? So that was definitely news to me as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting philosophy aspect to this, isn't it? Like, it's not worth, what is it worth saving the planet regardless of costs? Like, if it's worth, okay, yes, we've saved the planet, but it's not one people want to live in. If that's a kind of a rub against it, have we done the right thing? So it's an interesting, just kind of, a bit of friction there that I don't often consider, but probably is an important part of the conversation, and to bring more people into it. And I guess this is now really what I want to get to, the communication aspect, bringing people along with you, with the science community, not putting them off of it, not kind of having them turn against you and kind of protest work that you're doing. And so the next thing I wanted to ask you, XinRan, I saw recently that you're quite critical of a Guardian article that was written about Shell retreating from carbon offsetting. And I gather the problem you had with it was just the mode of communication, how effectively it was trying to get the story across wasn't helping the scenario at all. It wasn't helping fight climate change. What's the issue here? Like, what's going wrong on the communication level about how we get this information to everyday people?
Yeah, no, really good question. And I think the communication is really important because I think we live in a really fragile market and we live in a really fragile space where I think reputation is critical for these very emerging technologies to scale. And I think that's also why Undo is so focused on getting the science right, building a large science team and doing our own field trials and bringing our own modeling team and kind of at every step taking the most conservative approach in terms of what we think is how much carbon is being sequestered. So I think my issue with certain science communication is that historically in the space of carbon dioxide removal and carbon credits, there has certainly been some areas where there has been bad actors. I think Guardian called out some of those earlier in the year. And I think that's important too. I think it's important to call out the bad actors who are not contributing ultimately to protecting and saving the planet, but also kind of fraudulently creating carbon credits when carbon is not being removed. But I think there's a dangerous territory there to then for the audience to read that and just kind of shut off the carbon dioxide removal technology as a whole because they just think that this whole thing is being tainted by these bad actors. But I think what I was trying to get across is that this is actually a critical technology that needs to grow quite rapidly in the next decade in order to meet the demands as set out by the IPCC and other climate goals. All require us to decarbonize, to reduce our current emissions by 80%. And now, theoretically, the first 40, 60 should be easy, and the last 20 is going to be hard. And we're struggling to decarbonize even the first 40%. But there will be a point where if you want critical, there'll be industry and certain sectors of industry that'll be really difficult to decarbonize. And the only way to get to net zero and then the negative, if you want to get there, is to have carbon dioxide removal solutions that are already at a scale to kind of remove kind of the tens of billions of ton annual scale. And without support and understanding and kind of both support from the academic community and also from the wider population, and especially for our technology-wise, farming community and others, if there's distrust and there's confusion, then ultimately these technologies wouldn't scale at the speed that they need to for the betterment of the planet generally. We need to be getting to, Lizzie mentioned that we spread nearly 200,000 tons by the end of this year. And that will sequester 40,000 tons of CO2 over its course of its lifetime. But that is in terms of order scale, it's way off the millions of tons that we need and billions of tons we need ultimately in order to have an impact on the climate. And I think my concern about the Guardian article was that it was not contributing to overall public understanding of the space, but kind of creating. My concern was that it was creating confusion in the space, which might switch people off and dismiss this technology as a whole, when we really need people to understand it better and for the space to grow, but also for good actors to grow in this space and call out the bad actors.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair criticism, and it does take people like you that have this insight to call that out, because I haven't, before seeing what you'd said, I hadn't read that article. But I think if I had, I might likely have come to that conclusion, not knowing any better, not understanding the real science behind it. So I think what I'm trying to say is I'm grateful that people like you guys exist to do that and to call these things out and set the record straight. Some of those numbers that you mentioned are very hard to picture and get your head around. We're talking billions of tons of a gas that I can't see. Like, that's really, really hard to get my head around, but it does sound like a big problem. I know those are big numbers. And I wonder whether often it feels like too big a problem for people to feel like they can really meaningfully contribute and help. But am I right in saying that the work that Undo are currently doing, normal people, businesses, they can get involved and support the work that you do? Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have various types of outreach. We have commercial outreach, and also kind of businesses and individuals can get involved in getting to net zero, essentially. I mean, our main focus is big businesses, because that's where the majority of emissions comes from. And it's all about education, really, and taking them on a path with us. So we host site visits in Scotland where we can show them all of our operations. It's definitely very helpful to get the word out and get the understanding across of what we're doing.
On a personal level, this interests me because outside of all the the facts and the science, there's real people behind all this work and their own stories and motivations. So I'm keen to pick that apart a little bit more. So I'd like to ask both of you individually what it is about this field, this carbon capture. I think with your skills and talents, you guys probably could have had a huge array of options in front of you that you could have worked in. Why carbon capture? Why Undo? What is it about it that speaks to you and makes you feel like, yeah, this is the way to go?
Well, I mean, I guess it's quite interesting, maybe coming from someone who's just left university, because the world is at your feet. Lots of industries to go into, which is definitely really exciting. I mean, I've always been interested in sustainability. I focused on sustainable chemistry at university, and in my master's in hydrogen fuels, that was always something that a path that I wanted to go down. I think the great thing about working within this space, one, I'm still being a startup, but just two, within carbon dioxide removals, is that it's mission driven. You're working to a purpose, which makes you want to go to work in the morning. But I would also say, secondly, it's a rapidly growing market, and it's just exciting to be a part of it, to go along that journey, especially as someone who's just started their career.
And the same to you, XinRan. I'll ask you the same question. Because I guess you're a bit later on in your career and have gone through different fields. So what is it about this one that's really, really grabbed you and personally gets you going?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched upon it at the beginning as well. So I've always worked in particle physics, but even through the whole time there, I had a keen interest in climate. I mean, of course, because as a scientist looking at the data, it was clear that the greenhouse gas emissions is causing global temperatures to rise, and then the subsequent modeling showing the resultant problems that leads to as a result of global warming was pretty terrifying, I guess. But I worked for over a decade in particle physics because that was the thing that most interested me at university, and I kind of was keen to work with detectors and build new technologies. But at some point, these projects are now at such a scale, they're taking like kind of 10 to 15 years to construct, and then 5-10 years of data taking. So, my last experiment was just complete, and we finished our detector, and we published a world-leading paper in dark matter, and we showed that we were the best detector in the world at not finding dark matter. So I don't know if that was a win or not. And then the discussions were like, do we build the next one? And I was faced with the question of, do I want to spend the next 25 years of my life building dark matter detectors, which has fundamental impact on the world of particle physics, of course. But at the same time, I was realizing there was this ever narrowing window to something about the climate crisis, which at the time, which I still think is the existential crisis of our time. So I made a decision consciously to use the skills I learned from coordinating and constructing large-scale experiments and bring that skill set to the world of environmental science, in particular carbon dioxide removal, which I kind of saw as something that inevitably is a technology that we need. And I just by chance, I actually, in the aim to do public engagement, in my previous role, I was very keen to do lots of public engagement and bring world experts to schools in the UK, because I think inspiring the next generation is critical to motivate the next generation to bring new ideas into the space. So COP26 was in Glasgow. I was reaching out to lots of experts in both industry and academia to come and talk to schools in remote parts of Scotland, because I am still based at the University of Edinburgh. And through that, I came across the Future Force company, and this role was being advertised, and it was a perfect fit for exactly what I was looking for. I really fundamentally believe in the goals of Undo and the fact that it's very closely related to science, very science driven and grounded in science. As we scale, we are trying to scale based on scientific rigor. That was very attractive to me. Like, I think there, as we already discussed, a lot of confusion in the space. And I think that, for the space to grow, there needs to be very high credibility, right? And the carbon dioxide removal credits that are being generated needs to be firmly grounded in scientific facts, and you can verify these carbon removals, and it's not just kind of smokes and mirrors. So being able to contribute in that space was really important to me. And enhanced rock weathering, the more I read about it, the more it seemed like an incredible technology, and it just needed this bring from the laboratories to the real world, and I really felt like I could contribute there. So that kind of what drew me out, and yeah, now really, really happy to build an interdisciplinary science team to work together and address that problem. So it's been great fun.
As we look to the future, which can be quite daunting, especially in this realm, this conversation, where is all this going? What are we kind of looking at for the future of, I guess, for Undo as an organization? What does their future look like, and or at least plans to look like if all goes well? And then I guess maybe if you could speak to even the wider impact of that. If we do start to reduce emissions and capture what we've put out into the atmosphere previously, what might the world look like?
So in the kind of immediate future, Undo we're planning to scale, because that's, as we've said previously, is the only way to get to gigaton scale of CO2 removal. And to do that, we are expanding internationally, bringing on partners within Canada, within Australia, because without access to land, you have no business. We need to have farmers on board trusting us to get this to scale. And this also has a massive impact on farmers, because they feel the kind of the brunt of climate change, and sometimes are blamed for the brunt of climate change too. So it's just the kind of wide-reaching positive impacts are phenomenal.
Your relationship with farmers, how is that going? Is that generally positive? Do you get a lot of pushback, or are they quite keen to this relationship and this mission and this progress? How is that going, or is that one of the main struggles of the business?
I think initially it was. You have to have trust, because it's kind of word of mouth how things pass, especially in agriculture, how knowledge passes through people. And it's their neighbor isn't doing it, they don't want to do it. So it's definitely about trust. But then if your neighbor is doing it, you want to do it. You want a bit of what they're doing. So we are definitely seeing kind of compounding success now with the word spreading out. I said word of mouth, but we do have as well regional managers and in-house agronomists who can coach our farmers through this process, so they know that they're not signing up to something that isn't reputable, for sure.
Yeah, maybe there's a bit of a network effect at play there. That's kind of interesting. And a bit of social pressure as well from your neighbouring farms. XinRan, I'll quickly throw back to you to finish up the end of my last questions about what the future might look like for the planet. If this all goes well, if we clear up the CO2, what are we looking at? What might the world be like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. And actually, I think my answer is to help address both questions. And I love the follow-up as well. And as the head of science, we're really trying to scale this technology. And it's been well understood weathering, the natural weathering process. Enhanced weathering has been well studied in laboratories as well, and trying to take that out to the real world, measuring accurately in the UK where we're spreading right now. But then as we scale up to the megaton scale, trying to find a measurement technology that can actually quantify how much is being sequestered, then that can scale to global scale. So that's kind of what we're focusing on. But another big element is kind of quantifying what is the impact of deploying this amount of rock on a global scale. We touched earlier on the co-benefits, right? So in a world where there's multiple carbon dioxide removal technologies and carbon dioxide removal is table stakes, it's really the co-benefits of enhanced rock weathering. So the improvements to soil health, the improvement to the crops, not just yield, but making them more pest resilient. All these things are kind of need more studying. I think a lot of the focus has been on can silicate rock weathering sequester CO2 and kind of be a better power for the planet, but then also quantifying the environmental impact piece and the ecological impact piece. We're really interesting as well. Like there are studies that suggest that enhanced rock weathering can boost soil microbial activities, worm activities. All these things would be really cool to quantify, and that would enable us to scale as well. And a lot of our farmers are really interested in the science, and they've read our papers. And as there are more papers on large scale trials coming out, it's definitely supporting us as well in this space. And I think having trusted, so we do all of our trials with independent partners like Newcastle University, Scottish Rural College, James Hutton Institute, and they, even though we supply the material, they conduct our trials, and that adds a level of independence, which farmers trust. These are like trusted institutes, which farmers know, right? So And I think that scaling has been very powerful as well. In a world where you removed all the historical emissions, I guess it would be at a time scale when if we get to that day and I retire at that point, I think that would be a fantastic achievement. I mean, yeah, we will definitely look back to this point as one of the pivotal moments when at the very beginning stages of this new technology. I'm sure wherever the world of carbon dioxide removal goes, enhanced rock weathering will play a pretty pivotal role in contributing to a large chunk of that CO2 removal in the future.
I'm not a massive fan of hope in general, but are you guys hopeful in this mission? Do you think this is really, really achievable?
I think if we kind of continue on the trajectory that we are, definitely, it's a really lovely thing to be working on, and we're doing good at it, and that's super hopeful for sure.
I was gonna have a slightly pessimistic start and then end on a hopeful note, but I generally do think, like, right now trying to find reducing emissions, finding carbon dioxide removal technologies, I think science will contribute a lot to getting us out of this climate crisis in the coming decades. But at the same time, the fundamental workings of our entire planet is set up to create the environment we're in today, right? So we're kind of right now like trying to solve, and another analogy would be like we're trying to solve for lung cancer by building more hospitals when we fundamentally need to stop people smoking. And that part is hard, and I don't have a clear solution for that. But what I do see is on the innovation space, it always brings me with optimism. Like, I think human ingenuity will find new solutions to tackle complex problems. And I have no doubt, like, every time I go to any innovation event, hear the new technologies people are talking about, it fills me with excitement. And I guess hope is the word we're talking about here for the future, because I do think that like human innovation will ultimately get us out of this climate disaster that we're heading towards. But I think we should also, perhaps consider also fundamentally changing our society along the process for one that isn't geared up so much to create this crisis in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. The interconnectivity of everything needs to really kind of come to the front, and science is obviously a massive part of it, but there's so many other moving parts in this, and we're all in it together. So absolutely agree. But I like your positivity, and I'd like to keep that going as we end now. Because the last thing I'd like you to do, I'm going to ask you individually, Lizzie, if I come to you first, I'd like you to just name someone that you think is creating a positive impact in the world. That can be someone in your professional field, it can be a business, an organization, a charity, a person, a friend, a relative, whoever you think is worthy of a moment's attention.
Wow, I actually might go to XinRan first, because I think I'll need a minute to think.
All right. I thought you were
Jim.
choosing me as your inspirational friend. I was like, don't do that.
Well, that'd be one of them. It would be one of them.
That'd be too easy. Okay, Xinran, I'll go to you first. Your nomination for who you think is working hard to make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I think my immediate response, less seriously, would be something like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who I always loved his movies and I think he's making great impacts in the climate space. And I keep on saying that, despite making these videos with his myriad of donkeys and animals in his farm. But a more serious answer, I guess, it's difficult, because I really think the academics in this community who have been developing these technologies like enhanced weathering, and they've been shouting about it for decades, trying to get funding to secure the science to allow this technology to take off commercially. They do. There's many scientists in that space, and they deserve recognition. And there's probably not enough space just to choose one. Or I would say maybe my answer would be like Cascade Climate, which is a non-profit organization trying to set good standards in the enhanced rock weathering space, so that as we scale, it's grounded in facts and truth and science. And we could look at the carbon credits we're generating and the carbon removal we're causing, and be confident that there's no smokes and mirrors, and we're actually doing net benefit for the planet. So I think it needs to be more actors like that who kind of set the standards for people to follow, which I think, and engaging the academic community, engaging the commercial community, engaging the kind of wider community. I think what they're doing is really good. So I'm going to choose them for my one shout out.
That's a great answer. Lizzie, with the extra time you've had, has that inspired you to think of anyone?
It has. I mean, I think this is probably quite a cheesy answer, but it's probably all of the startups who are trying to do carbon dioxide removals, ocean cleanup, all these smaller companies that you might not have heard of who are trying their absolute best to sort the global issues out for everyone else. So yeah, definitely a massive collaborative effort.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know what? That's perfect, because that's what this podcast is all about, really. I enjoy talking to people all doing their own unique thing. I've said this quite a lot in some previous episodes. Not everyone is as smart as you guys and can work with carbon removal, but I do believe everyone can do something. Everyone has their unique contribution to climate change and to making the world a better place. So I think you're absolutely right. Ocean cleanup is a massive one. Actually, the ocean cleanup project's someone I'm hoping to have on very soon. But yeah, you're absolutely right. No one can do it all by themselves. There's so many moving parts, and I'm really glad that you guys are a part of that, and the hard work that you're doing is evident to me now that I've spoken to you more about it. I wasn't aware of Arnold Schwarzenegger and his impact, so I might need to go and see what he's up to at the moment. I thought he was busy eating 30, 40 eggs a day at the moment.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time, guys. I've really learned a lot from that, and I have definitely got my head around it a lot more than I thought I would have. So credit to you guys for taking me with you, and I hope you've done the same for some of our listeners. So look after yourselves. Keep up the good work. It really is very, very important, and I really do wish you all the best. Apologies to the people of Yorkshire. I was of course joking. I do not blame you for climate change. It feels good to know that there are some truly smart people working together to come up with innovative ways to get us out of this mess. Now, I don't take it so far as to say that means I can run around and do what I please because some shiny piece of tech will save us. We still need to do our bit. And what I love is that Undo have opened up a new level of accessibility to businesses and the likes of you and I to get involved with their work and help support it if we wish. You can simply subscribe on their website and your money will go directly to funding the work that Undo does to capture carbon. XinRan shout-outs today went to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Cascade Climate. Links to both of those will be in the show notes. And Lizzie, on those specifics, makes a really good point about reminding us that there are tons of small businesses and organisations out there that are all doing their bit to help fight the climate crisis. There may be a huge mountain to climb ahead of us, but after today's chat, I do honestly feel a little bit more upbeat about it all. But let me know how you feel after listening to today's episode. The email is cpi@soundquake.co.uk, or you can use the Spotify Q&A function. This is far from the end of episodes we'll have with people directly tackling climate change. There are many avenues to explore, so please do get in touch if you think there's someone we should really be talking to. If you want to make an impact, remember that you have to start by looking after yourself first. As a wise man once said, you can't pour from an empty cup.